Hello and welcome to part 2 of making an Italian Renaissance gown. As a reminder, in part 1, I went over the design and pattern of this gown, as well as the construction of the bodice. In part 2, we will be dealing with the construction of the skirt. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend watching that one first, as we are going to jump right into things here. As you may recall in part 1, I cut off the length of the skirt first and put it away, so now we're going to revisit those skirt pieces. The skirt will be made of 3 panels of fabric minus a 6-inch cut off of one panel, which I harvested to get enough fabric to make the bodice. My skirt length is 50 inches long, so I added a few inches to each panel so that I could true up the pattern of the fabric. I'm not going to worry about matching the exact motif across the seams, but I am making sure to match the general horizontal lines of the fabric together so that the pattern isn't obviously off kilter. Once they're all pinned together, I'm going to sew up all of the seams by machine. Now let's revisit that one seam where I cut off a piece of the fabric for the bodice. This fabric frays like crazy, so this seam does need to be finished. I'm going to fell it by trimming down the raw edge, folding the selvage edge over it, and then whip stitching it down to encase the raw edge. I'm doing the sewing by hand. Once it's all done, it's basically invisible from the outside of the fabric. Now I can revisit all those weird overhangs that were left over from my pattern alignment and trim those off. Time to talk about managing the fullness of the skirt so I can attach them to the bodice. My original gown was made with cartridge pleats, but I really don't have enough fullness in the skirts to warrant cartridge pleats, and I also think this fabric will look better with gathers instead of pleats. I don't really know if either of these options are more accurate than the other, but I'm just not going to worry about that. I'm going to give myself some extra work here by facing the top edge of the skirt panels with a cotton tape. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One, I need to protect this fabric since it is so prone to unraveling, but I'm worried that if I turn it under twice to protect the raw edge, it's going to add a ridge, which is going to be annoying to work with. And number 2, the cotton tape will provide a little bit of extra body to the fabric, which will make the gathers easier to manage and a little bit prettier. All I'm going to do is turn the fabric under 1/2 of an inch, lay the cotton tape over it, and sew down both the top and bottom edges of the tape. I'm doing this by hand so that the stitching won't be too obvious when it's done. And a little high five from the sewing gods who gave me exactly as much tape as I needed. Yay! On the dress I made before, I cartridge pleated the skirts, but I'm not going to do that with this one, primarily because since I'm working with a limited amount of fabric, it's probably not going to look as good. You know, cartridge pleats look best when they have lots and lots of fabric to gather up. I also would like more of a soft look to the gathers instead of like the really rigid formal cartridge pleats. So I think having soft gathers will just sort of treat the skirt a little bit better, and I think it's going to work better for my purposes. And I just think it's going to look a little bit better on this style, so we'll see. Next up is the actual gathering. I'm using a pre-waxed silk thread for this task because it's strong and sturdy. There is nothing worse than a gathering thread breaking when you're in the middle of it. Now, unfortunately, I don't know where you can buy this because it's a vintage thread that I got a ton of from someone who is selling off old store stock, but there is a modern equivalent called Silamide, which is a pre-waxed, pre-cut heavy thread. It's really great stuff, and I'll link to it down below. I'm running 2 rows of parallel gathering stitches for this, starting in the center and working my way out so that it gathers in 2 even sections. and then we do the actual gathering. The nearly completed bodice is laid on top of the skirt and pinned down. I'm starting in the center and working my way out, making final adjustments to the gathering length to make it fit the bodice. Once it's all pinned on, I'm doing a very quick fit check to make sure I haven't overlooked any disasters. It's better to find out now than later. All right, now that I have the skirts all pinned on, I'm just gonna sew, I'm gonna top stitch along this edge here on the outside, and on the inside, I'm gonna whip stitch it down to the lining only, so it's anchored in 2 different points along the skirt bodice. And I'll make sure to catch any of these errant pieces that are sticking out. Instead of sewing this down with back stitches, I'm using a whip stitch, as that helped me manage the volume a little bit better. Every so often, I'm knotting the thread to give a bit more of an anchor point. Next, I'm sewing down the skirts on the inside of the bodice. This helps to anchor the skirt to the lining as well as manage any fluffiness from the tops of the gathers that holds them more flat against the body. All right, I'm down to the very last step, which is hemming this. Because this is such a shreddy material and I have such a limited amount of fabric left, I'm actually gonna face this hem with a little strip of linen tape. So this will encase the hem end. I don't have to turn it under twice. I can just turn it under once and encase it. And this tape actually has a little bit of bulk to it, so it's just gonna give the hem a little bit more substance and give it a little bit of stiffening, which will add just a little bit of oomph to the bottom of the dress. So that's what I'm gonna do now. I'll pin this on, I'll whip stitch it all down, and then we are ready to wear this sucker. Yay! And I'm really excited to wear it because I'm wearing it at a truly incredible place. I can't wait for you guys to see it. The hem is sewn down the exact same way as the tape on the top of the skirts, by whip stitching it down all along the top and bottom edges. There are 2 little last steps. One was sewing down a bit of ribbon to both the edges of the bodice so it ties in front. You could also add lacing holes to tie it closed or a hook and eye, but I liked the idea of having a bow in the center. I also added a very simple trim along the bodice edges. Since this fabric is so busy and elaborate, I thought less would be a little bit more when it came to the trimming. I layered a narrow golden trim over the ribbon and stitched it down to the bodice edges. And with that, it is all done. And now the very best part, wearing it. We visited an amazing place called Swannanoa, which is just outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. The day we were there was filled with the most magical, eerie fog, and getting to wander around this amazing place for an hour was an absolute treat, and I felt like I was walking around a villa in Italy. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this helps inspire you to make your own Italian Renaissance gown. This is such a simple and beautiful style, and I think it looks fantastic on everyone. Have a great day!